forget to like this video if you like it. Click subscribe, click notifications for future contents, and don't forget to share it with a friend. Greetings, family. This is Mike Allen here with Digging in the Word with a brand new video. It's been a long time coming. Actually, it's been about 2 years since I posted my last video. My last series I was working on was on the subject of biblical marriage, particularly polygamy. And actually, I'm working in my editing phase right now, post-recording, post-production. I'm working on a new series, which is actually going to continue with the same subject matter. But I wanted to take a break in my work and put out a video. It's something in the spirit of the moment, something that I don't normally do. But there's so much buzz that it's going on in the social media world at this time, and I know a lot of people are talking about it in the salons and the barbershops and in the office. If you've digested any social media content in the past week, it would have been hard for you not to have heard what has transpired. You see, last week we lost a brilliant, strong, successful, effective leader in the struggle for marriage and relationships. As many of you may know, image consultant, social media host, and manosphere king Kevin Samuels passed away at the age of 56, where he no doubt told men and women what is lacking and what is needed to get the outcome in what they may be looking for in a significant other, and to help cure the dysfunctional ills of particularly the black family. And after achieving so much in so little time with his blunt approach and delivering his timely message, he was sadly taken from us. It didn't matter who he talked to, whether it be man or woman, or whether white or black. His delivery, his message was always the same, and it was always in line with the facts and the reality surrounding what he talked about. He never shied from what they would call giving a person that smoke. Nevertheless, there has been a lot of negative and positive things people have said about him surrounding his death. Some egregious things, and there's been a lot of things that has been in reference to his memory and his praise and his legacy. But that's not the purpose as to why I wanted to come before this camera and talk with you guys. I wanted to take a different approach. And so I'd like to take this time to extend my personal condolences to the family of Kevin Samuels, his friends, his closest allies, his colleagues. I pray for you. I pray for your strength, as I know at this time you grieve, and as we all grieve, all who held him and endeared the type of man and communicator and messenger he was. He will definitely be missed, as most certainly we know that he cannot be replaced. Although there's a lot talking about replacing him and who's going to be the next manosphere king online or on social media. But I don't ever think that anyone can really replace him, or for any of us for that matter. Why? It's because when the Creator made each and every one of us, he made each one of us in a unique fashion. If I was to put a title on what it is that I want to talk with you guys about, I would just simply say, attempting to emasculate Kevin Samuels does not negate the truth. Attempting to emasculate Kevin Samuels does not negate the truth. Now, why am I choosing such a topic, or why am I want to go there? Well, if you've paid attention, as I said, to what has been going on, there has been a lot of negative comments. There's been a lot of negative reviews and sentiments that people have been expressing, particularly a lot of women, a lot of social media outlets that even when he was alive didn't agree with his message, took issue with his brazen, candid approach, blunt for that matter, when he would speak or he would be in communication with an individual on his channel. And so many don't like this approach, and I get it. I understand. We live in a culture where people prefer that things be palatable. People prefer that things will be somewhat watered down or made easy for them to be able to receive. But what Kevin, in his approach and his personality, as I was speaking with my wife on this, I was talking about how he, in his approach, it reminds me a lot of Jesus. Jesus was known for his candid approach when he spoke with individuals, particularly individuals where he recognized that they were just simply out of order, in denial. And particularly, this is how Jesus dealt with the religious leaders of his day. He would call them names like snakes or vipers, or he would call them a whitewashed tomb. In other words, he would call them a mausoleum full of dead men's bones, a cup that's clean on the outside but dirty on the inside. And so these are the things that Jesus, he even called a woman that he spoke with on a one-on-one occasion, he called her a dog to make his point. And so this, in a lot of ways, this was Kevin. I'm not saying Kevin was Jesus, but what I am saying is that in a lot of ways, this was Kevin. And because we live in such a sensitive society where people are easily offended, his approach was so hard for so many to be able to stomach, and oftentimes became labeled as being misogynistic, being labeled as being mean-spirited, being against women, and on and on and on. There were so many things that was labeled as from a negative perspective, but there was also a lot of things that he was labeled from a positive perspective. There are a lot of people that follow, particularly women. I believe most of his followers, if I'm not mistaken, according to his closest allies, were women that tuned in every day and that subscribed to his channel. And he started his career, on YouTube as a content creator. Particularly, he started it focusing on men. And if you would go on his channel, and I know, for myself, because if you go on his channel and you go back to those earlier videos that he put out, particularly to men, he was much more harsher towards men than he was towards women. The only reason why I think it became so controversial is because we live in a culture where women are so protected in terms of anyone saying anything publicly criticizing them, particularly black women. And so I want to deal with the Word of God, and I want to touch on what the Bible has to say concerning this. And as I was preparing for what I wanted to dig in the Word in reference to this, I was reminded of this issue of truth. And what would be that truth, as I put inside my title, that emasculating Kevin does not negate the truth. What would be that truth? Because a lot of people today love to talk about truth. A lot of people have an idea of what truth is. There was an interview with the flamboyantly gay actor and singer Billy Porter, who said on ABC's Good Morning America back on January 9, 2020, in response to being asked the question, where does he get his high energy from? Porter replied, he's been freed from the shackles of masculinity. As though somehow masculinity in and of itself is oppressive. While as a man, Porter himself denies what he truly is by wearing dresses and imitating being a woman. You see, these are the things that blur the lines within our culture and do not clearly demark what boundaries there are. So in other words, without boundaries, things become confused. Things become misunderstood. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding in reference to what truth is and what masculinity is. Now, if we were to define the word masculinity, according to dictionary.com, it is pertaining to or the characteristics of a man or men, like with masculine attire, things that men would wear or do. having qualities traditionally ascribed to men, such as strength or boldness. Now, if masculinity is somehow a shackle, then based on the dictionary's definition, I can see how Mr. Porter veers from its attire, how he loves donning dresses, while shunning the qualities of the traditional boldness of masculinity and strength. However, the Bible does teach us that the very truth of God is what makes us free, not some issue with being freed from the shackles of masculinity as he proposes. In the book of Galatians, the 5th chapter, the 7th through the 12th verse, I'm going to read for you guys. It reads as this in the New International Version. It says, "You were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you. A little yeast works through the whole batch of dough. I am confident in the Lord that you will take no other view. The one who is throwing you into confusion, whoever that may be, will have to pay the penalty." Brothers and sisters, if I am still preaching circumcision, why am I still being persecuted? In that case, the offense of the cross has been abolished. As for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. This is a passage which is actually from a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to the church at a city called Galatia in the first century when the church was newly formed. And the issue of what was going on during this time, this was predominantly a Greek or Gentile congregation, which means that a lesser percentage of the congregation was made up of Jews. But we know that the gospel and Jesus himself was a Jew. And being that it was of Judeo origins, this new faith that we had, which began back in the first century, there was some issues in reference to some changes that took place between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so there was confusion. And the confusion was, well, what things do we discontinue going from the Old Covenant into the New Covenant, and what things remain the same? One of the things that seems like it was hard for individuals to understand was this issue of circumcision. Now, circumcision, according to the Old Testament, according to the Old Covenant, was a sign. It was a symbol. It denoted that one had a relationship with God, that one belonged to God, that one was in submission to God, that one was a servant of God. And so, as the New Testament came in, there was this message that fulfilled that Old Covenant symbol of circumcision, and that was that Christ himself is the circumciser of our hearts, enabling us to have a relationship with God. It is that Christ himself is the very one that we put our faith and our trust in, even above a ceremonial ritual as circumcision. And so what Christ did and what he fulfilled became paramount to any of the ceremonial rituals of the Old Testament or the Old Covenant. And so the problem was that you had patriotism of the Jews in Paul's day, many of them who were of the same mindset who actually killed Jesus. These people, when they came into the church or became a part of the church, they came with this same mindset of Hebrew patriotism. And so therefore, as you had these non-Jews coming into the church, they began to impose, these Jews, these who were so-called quote-unquote believers in Christ, began to impose upon these non-Jews, these Gentiles, Jewish traditions and Jewish customs. Like what we see today. There are these customs of the day that are being imposed that doesn't necessarily align with truth. And so, as we have this cultural war that's going on, these cultural ideals are what they're doing is bringing about confusion, persuasion, and a veering away from what is truth. So, I want to do something that will make it even more clearer. I want to look at some of the words that Paul uses here in this particular passage, and I want to go deeper and I want to dig deeper into those words, and I want to bring out and expose some meaning so that we can get a further appreciation for this passage as it relates to our dear brother Kevin and as it relates to this subject of masculinity being emasculated or manhood being emasculated and this thing called the truth. So the first word that Paul talks about in this passage is truth. And that word is just simply communicates anything that which God says is something is. So in other words, truth is whatever God says something is. If God doesn't say it is so, it is, then that does not make it true. And that is what the Bible is referencing to truth. So when God created man and God created women, when God created masculinity and when God created femininity, it is his truth or his perspective on what those things are, not what the culture later on dictates what those things are. The another word is the word cut into, or the phrase cut into that Paul uses here. He actually used it when he said this. He says you were running a good race. Who cut in on you to keep you from obeying the truth? Cut into is the word or the phrase that he uses. Well, in the Greek, it is to impede, it is to detain, it is to block off of the road as a person may be traveling down a road or traveling down a particular path and something or someone, it could be, you could be driving on an interstate and a deer comes in on a road, or a bunch of birds or chickens, they come across the road and all of the drivers stop to prevent from running them over or hitting them. Well, in this regard, this is what the Apostle Paul was talking about. These individuals that were a part of this congregation, they were on this path in this new faith in Christ, and they were on this journey. But now you have these individuals, these agitators, he calls them, who comes in and gets in front of them and now begins to block them and impede their progress of moving forward. He even goes on to say that what they've done in the beginning of this particular chapter, you're going back to the first verse, that it was an enslavement. In other words, what these agitators actually did came in to enslave them. And it is kind of like what we see going on within the culture, that there has been dysfunctional behaviors and ideas that has been communicated, and therefore, instead of it has setting people free, what it in turn has done has caused an enslavement to the community. It has caused an enslavement within relationships. It has restricted, it has impeded the progress of relationships. One of the things that Kevin points out is back in the 60s, before the civil rights bills were passed, he would often put out the stats that the black family was at such a high rate, where the black family rate, mother, father, and children, all in the same household, were at a high rate of 80%. From slavery up until the civil rights bills being passed, there were periods and times where the black family actually had a higher rate than the white family. And so something happened since that period, as he puts out, something happened in that period between the civil rights bills being passed up until now. Today, it is in like the total reverse. Instead of the black family rate being mother, father, and children together in the same home at 80%, well, now the homes are split up and the family rate has reduced to 20%. So that means out of every 10 black baby that is born, 8 of them are born out of wedlock. Now these statistics, these facts are substantiated, easily. You go on blackdemographics.com, the census, whatever. But these stats are there. They validate what he said. And the problem is that people take issue with reality, and people take issue with the truth. And so therefore, with being told a lie so much, you become accustomed to it. And you begin to treat the lie as though it is truth to you. And so anyone that comes along, it doesn't matter what the tone that they use, because I've seen Kevin use a softer tone, and I've seen him get very rigid and stern and blunt. And even times he would even make jokes. No matter how the delivery, there were many, and there were always those who disagreed with the message. Obey is another word that the Apostle Paul used in this particular passage. And in the Greek, that is to persuade. It is to agree. It is to have confidence in. And so what he's talking about is that these agitators, as they came along and they began to impose upon these Gentile believers within the church that they had to now be circumcised. Having a relationship with Christ was not enough. And so what they needed to do on top of, or in order to have a relationship with Christ, is that they would have to be circumcised. And so by doing this, this was a direct interference or persuasion away from them obeying the truth. How is it so? Well, faith in and of itself is a commandment in scriptures, in the Bible. And so if we don't put our faith as we are commanded in Christ because of some other reasons, then what we're doing is acting out of disobedience. And that's the reason why he says that these agitators has caused you to no longer obey the truth. A little yeast is the word that he uses here, or the term that he uses here. Well, in the Greek, this is to mix leaven with dough so as to make it ferment. And it causes the bread in and of itself to rise. So in the particular passage, he says metaphorically, it deals with the effective persuasion of teaching that, such as one must be circumcised, causing an individual to no longer obey that which is true. So in other words, the leaven in and of itself, or the yeast in and of itself, is the teachings. This was also used, we see in scriptures, by Jesus. Jesus warned his disciples in reference to the religious leaders of his day, which were called the Pharisees. He says, watch out for the yeast or the leaven of the Pharisees. He said they are blind teachers and they are blind guides. He said, leave them alone. If the blind lead the blind, they will both fall into the ditch, is the analogy that Jesus used. Emasculate. Now here it is, we come to the core word of this particular topic that we're dealing with. In the Greek, Paul used this word, emasculate, and the word is simply to cut off. It is to sever. And it is to, in an instance of, say, circumcision, there is a cutting off of the foreskin of the penis. Now, this was necessary because it symbolized that a person's heart, the foreskin of it, was cut off, meaning that the person's heart was conformed to God. And so this particular cutting that Paul uses here, he calls it a mutilation. And so it is a castration. In the passage, he actually puts it this way. He says, as for those agitators, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves, meaning that he understood that what these agitators were doing was they were compelling men to castrate themselves, emasculate themselves in a way. How? When an individual ignores the truth, when a man denies the truth, that man metaphorically has emasculated himself. When a man allows himself to become pressured, he gives way to fear. When he becomes afraid to stand up to what is truthful concerning himself, when he becomes afraid to stand up to his woman, and so therefore he compromises on the things that he knows that he should do just to please her. You know that saying that we say in the culture, happy wife, happy life? Well, if her happiness is at the cost of a man's ignoring the truth or disobeying the truth, then he has emasculated himself. So this is what the Apostle Paul was basically conveying, was that masculinity is represented by a man's truthfulness. If a man is no longer truthful to himself and truthful to others, he has thus emasculated himself. And so the title of this particular message is that even though individuals are seeking to emasculate Kevin, it does not negate the truth that he spoke. It does not do away with the truth that he aligned with in his words, in his delivery, in his message. Although many didn't like it, many didn't fully understand it, or didn't want to understand it for that matter, it does not take away the truth. It does not take away what is God has to say concerning it. And God does have something to say in reference to a lot of what Kevin talked about as it relates to the subject of men and women within relationship. You see, the whole scheme of the devil from the very beginning has been to emasculate the manhood of men by steering them away from the truth, friends. Because manhood is something that always has been noted in terms of man's leadership within the world and man's representation and glory that he brings to God. This is true because godly manhood is designed for nothing else but truth. Once a man operates based on a lie, as I said once again, and gives in to fear and he lies, whether it be to his woman, whether it be to his business partner, whether it be to a customer, whether it be to the police officer, it doesn't matter. Once he begins to lie, his nature changes. And once his nature changes, he steps out of the realm in which he was designed. That is the way God made him to be in character. He made him to be truthful. He did not make him to be a liar. He did not make him to be a coward that is afraid to stand up and stand for the truth. Why? Because this reflects the very image of God. God, the Bible says God is truth. That God is a God of truth. And so if man is to reflect the image of God, the only way that he can reflect it, it has to be in the same principle of truth. Friends, this is why false teaching and embracing corruptible culture is always dangerous to manhood. Because whenever the devilish lies are involved, it always is about stealing men away from obeying the truth. To make or to take God's glory and distort the reflection of his image he desires to show forth in man is to do that. It is to steer and veer away from the truth. To me, Kevin was an advocate for restoring men, God's man, to his rightful place, which is why he was so castigated by those that are so against to the way how God has designed men for men to be. That is, to be respected in society, and particularly to be respected within the home. For women, we know, do not have a penis. This is how we know that what Kevin was onto, he was somehow in line with what God was saying to us in scriptures. Because our God has always intended that the man be the representative head of the nuclear family and in society, not the woman. This is the reason why when God gives the commandment, or Moses gave the commandment, that the Israelite men had to be circumcised as a sign of their submission to him, he did not give a commandment for women to be circumcised. Circumcision was only for the head of the household, or men who would be potentially heads of households. Friends, why do you think, as Kevin said it, there has been this big push to break down the nuclear family by emasculating the man from his rightful place, to replace him with the woman with the influence of feminism, all influenced by ideals that do not necessarily coincide with truth. In First Corinthians, we see the examples of this. This is another letter that the Apostle Paul wrote in his teaching into this particular congregation. On the 3rd verse, he says, "But I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ. The head of woman is man. And the head of Christ is God." So there you have this hierarchy that Paul talked about, that you see God is the ultimate head, and then he is the head. God is the head of Christ, and then Christ is the head of the man, and the man is the head of the woman. This has always been God's hierarchy, or his order, or his system of authority, or the way authority should be within the earth, whether it be within the home or within society at large. It has never been intended by God to flip the order, or to distort, or to blur the lines of the order. Then further on in the same chapter of 1 Corinthians 11, verses 7 to 9, Paul also says this: "For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and the glory of God. But woman is the glory of man. For man is not from the woman, but woman from the man." You see, God made Adam first, and the woman was made from the man. "Nor was man created for the woman, but woman for the man." As men and as women, we have lost our way. And it is full time we get back to the order. Men, my charge to you is stop being afraid and claim your proper role in the home and in society. Women, get out of the way and let your man lead. If you know that your man is supposed to, because a lot of ladies will say, "Well, I want my man to lead." Well, he can't lead if you won't let him. Start learning what it is that the man needs from you, and just be that. What he needs from you to lead, and just be that. So folks, as a culture imposes standards that goes against the very nature and the true nature that God intended the man to be or to have, which is constantly seeking to emasculate him by not living in the standard of truth, this flies in the very face of God, because man was created to reflect the very image of God. And I know I've said it, but I can't say it enough. Man was designed to reflect the very image of God as being the respected head of his woman and in the world. Therefore, from Paul's perspective, any false teaching emasculates a man. Any false idea that a man will listen to, adapt to, conform to, he thus has become, or thereby has become, emasculated, because it leads him away from obeying the truth. Well, that's all I got for you, friends. I just hope that, there's something that I said, it will resonate. Hopefully, what I said, it can be of some sort of benefit. But I just wanted to give God's perspective. There's been a lot of perspectives online individuals have of how they feel. But I want to give God's feeling. And God has always intended that men and women function in a way that he specifically designed. And that whenever we veer away from that function, we are veering away from truth. And so I encourage you, look up these scriptures that and in your personal time, and go over the video, share it with others. In fact, like it if you like it, and do subscribe. Hit that notification bell and look out for my next video. Keep digging in the word, and you take care. Thank you for watching. God bless.